On the 21st of July, 1658, the Mughals had a new king, whose name was Abul Muzaffar, Mohyuddin Muhammad Aurangzeb Bahadur Alamgir Padshah Ghazi. He's got more names than the Khaleesi from Game of Thrones. This is our dear tyrant Aurangzeb. He came to power in 1658. And it is a very widely known story that one of the first things he did when he came to power was he imprisoned his father, the lover boy, Shahjehan. And this story is told with a lot of compassion in our NCERT books. And probably every time somebody goes to the Taj Mahal, I'm sure they hear the story that he spent the rest of the days imprisoned in Agra and in a prison cell which had a small window, and from that small window he could look at the Taj Mahal and be reminded of this wife of his that he so loved and in whose memory the Taj Mahal was built. Certainly makes you feel bad for Shah Jahan, except the fact that none of this is really true. He was imprisoned, yes, that's right, that's for sure. But he had a lot of freedom as well. He had all the luxuries. He had his whole staff with him, his concubines, his servants, even his favorite daughter, though some call her the favorite wife. She was there as well, Jahanara. So it's not like he was confined in some small cell. He still had a pretty good life. And given his nature and the kind of things he did during his life, I don't think he was much bothered with lamenting for his dead wife. But in that Agra prison, he spent the rest of his days. So one of these days, Shah Jahan was about to sit for dinner, and his man Friday, Akbar Khan, was laying out the dinner for him. And just as Shah Jahan was about to begin eating, Akbar Khan entered with a big box, and he laid it before Shah Jahan. He said, "King Aurangzeb, your son, sends this to our majesty to let him see that he does not forget him." So the old king, who was living a somewhat sad life because he could not be in the middle of the action, he was not in Delhi. So for a king who was so used to power, who was so used to people jumping around to please him, being imprisoned in Agra, even in this luxurious setting, would have been a step down. But at the news that his son had sent him a gift, Shah Jahan immediately cheered up. And he exclaimed, "Blessed be God that my son still remembers me." The box was placed upon the table, and he very eagerly ordered Akbar Khan to open the box. And when the lid of the box opened, to his horror, he discovered the head of his favorite son, Dara Shikoh, perhaps the most secular Mughal there ever was. It's said that he had studied the Upanishad and that he really wanted to convert to Christianity around the time of his death. So the box was opened and Shah Jahan got the shock of his life. And on seeing the head of his favorite son in the box, he smashed his face into the table and broke a few of his teeth. It's quite a comical sight to imagine this great Mughal king smashing his face into the table and breaking a few of his teeth and weeping like a child at the pain that it had caused him. After a while, the king regained his consciousness and he began to pluck out his beard till it was all bleeding. After that, he started beating his face and crying. Raising both his hands to the heaven, he said, "Khuda teri raza, my God, thy will be done." These were the final days of Mughal king Shah Jahan. And this whole thing had been planned by Aurangzeb, down to the timing, because he had prevailed upon Akbar Khan to do this exactly as was planned, just so he could bring some more misery to his father. And even the way he killed his brother, Dara Shikoh, was pretty barbaric. He sent some of his soldiers to find and kill the challenger to the Mughal throne, Dara Shikoh. And when they found him, they immediately cut off his head, left his body to welter in its own blood. They just took his head with them to show Aurangzeb. And when Aurangzeb learned that his brother had been killed and his head was being brought to him, he got the head cleaned up. A new turban was put on the head and it was brought to Aurangzeb on a silver plate. And when the head was brought to him, he examined it thoroughly to ensure that it was indeed his brother. After that, he thrust his sword 3 times in the face of his dead brother and said, "Behold the face of a would-be king and emperor of all the Mughal realms. Take him out of my sight." This was Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb that is considered a wali by subcontinental followers of Islam. Aurangzeb, who's an extremely important figure in Islamic history, who's glorified by our NCERT books. The reason why I'm talking about this today is because a few days ago there was a lot of brouhaha about NCERT books being amended to remove the chapters concerning the Mughals. A lot of people welcomed the idea, a lot, especially the left, were completely against it. And I also was against it because I do not think that these things should be removed from our books. On the other hand, we should teach the true history of the Mughals to our students. The NCERT books should be amended, that's for sure, because right now, the history of the Mughals that they present is very cooked up. It's very glorified. And that should not be taught at all. Just teach our kids, our students, the true history of the Mughals, because such stories have to be told. Just imagine this. All the Mughal stories from all the school books have been removed. But 70, 100 years down the line, let's say somebody discovers a book written by Romila Thapar or Irfan Habib, and suddenly they read the book and they wonder, hey, what is this? Who are these Mughals about whom these great things are being written? And they spread this to other people. They probably make a video or whatever the 100-year later equivalent of media consumption is, whatever method is being used then, they use it to make it go viral, so to say. And all of a sudden, Mughals are back in conversation. Everybody's talking about Mughals all over again. And people are wondering, hey, why was this not taught to us? Why was this being kept from us? And the curiosity grows. When you forbid somebody from something, their curiosity about that certain thing grows even more. So let's not delete the Mughals from our books. Let's teach the true history of the Mughals to our students. And it's not just that Aurangzeb was the bad guy. All of them were the bad guys. Look at his father, Shahjehan. This whole story of Taj Mahal being this incredible monument of love, which was built by Shahjehan with so much love. It was not built by Shahjehan. It was built by skilled Indian labor, using the money of the Indian taxpayers. Peter Mundy, who was a traveler, traveled through the region during Shahjahan's time. He has an excerpt from the things that he saw while he was traveling across the rural areas during this time. And it's not for the faint of heart. He says, in Surat, great famine, highways unpassable, infested by thieves, looking not for gold but grain, Kirka. Town empty, half inhabitants fled, other half dead. Dhahita, children sold for 6 dams, or given for free to any who could take them so they might be kept alive. And he further goes to Maharashtra. No space to pitch a tent, dead bodies everywhere. Noisome smell from a neighboring pit where 40 dead bodies were thrown. Survivors searching for grains and excrement of men and animals. Highways stowed with dead bodies from Surat to Burhanpur. And while there was a famine and people were dying, what was King Shahjahan doing? He was building the Taj Mahal. About the Mughal rulers, Peter Mundy writes, in Bazaar lay people dead and others breathing their last, with the food almost near their mouths, yet dying for want of it. They not having wherewith to buy, nor the others so much pity to spare them any without money. There being no course taken in this country to remedy this great evil, the rich and strong, engrossing and taking perforce all to themselves. The only thing that Shahjahan and his people thought about was themselves. This king is busy building the Taj Mahal, using the taxes which were the highest in the world. And this comes straight from the research of a JNU researcher by the name of Shireen Muswi. She writes that the Mughals took 56.7% of the total produce of the peasants. Can you imagine your government taking 56.7% of everything? For most of the Hindu kings of that time, it was 11 to 15%. 11 to 15 and 56.7%. It's a big difference. And it's not like they used this revenue for the people either. It is this incredible misconception that the Mughals were so great for the economy and they made India so prosperous. No, they did not. 68 of these princes took 36.5% of the entire revenue of the state. A further 25% was divided amongst 587 officers. So essentially, 62% of the total revenue was kept in their pockets by the Mughal elites. Well, certainly reminds you of a certain neighboring country of ours, doesn't it? And it's not just Peter Mundy who's criticizing the Mughals. Vincent Arthur Smith, another historian, he writes about Shahjahan. In affairs of state, Shahjahan was cruel, treacherous, and unscrupulous. He had little skill as a military leader. His justice was merely the savage, unfeeling ferocity of the ordinary Asiatic despot, exercised without respect for persons and without the slightest tincture of compassion. This is the great romantic king, Shahjahan, that our NCERT books tell us about. Perhaps only slightly less barbaric than his own son. But it doesn't end here. If you go a couple of steps back to Akbar, the great Akbar, about whom the Darbari historians and the leftist propagandists can't stop harping about. How did Akbar gain power? We know that he beat Hem Chandra Vikramaditya, but how did that happen? To quote the events from the Mughal Empire by the respected historian R.C. Majumdar, he writes, Hemu was on the point of gaining victory when an arrow struck him in the eye and pierced his brain, and he fell unconscious in the saddle. This turned the tide of the battle. Hemu's army lost its morale and dispersed. 2,000 were killed during retreat, and all of Hemu's elephants fell into the hands of the Mughals, who obtained a complete and decisive victory. The story of the Mughal Empire now begins, but it doesn't end here. He continues, Hemu was captured by Shah Quli Khan Muharram, who brought him to the presence of Akbar at a short distance from the field of action. That's another thing that I find very interesting, not just about the Mughals, but about all these Islamic army leaders, all these Islamic kings. They are never at the front of the battle. They don't even make the ceremonial gesture of leading the troops to the battle. They send the troops up ahead while they remain way, way behind, well protected by many rings of security. Bairam Khan begged him to slay Hemu with his own hand in order to gain the reward of jihad and the title of Ghazi. And this is a half-dead Hemu who's barely conscious. Akbar accordingly struck Hemu with his sword, and Bairam Khan followed him because he also probably wanted the title of a Ghazi. The story of Akbar's magnanimity and refusal to kill a fallen foe seems to be a later courtly invention. The humane and liberal emperor of Hindustan, who preached universal toleration, was not born but made. He was manufactured by Darbari historians. And this is Akbar, the supposed secular and liberal Mughal king, who is desperate to become a Ghazi. How is this different from all these mujahideen from Pakistan, Afghanistan, and other places in the world who join all these terrorist groups to become a Ghazi, to go on a jihad? Because anybody who follows that theological system knows that a Ghazi gets the highest place in heaven. And in the Islamic ideology, the goal is not just getting heaven, but getting to the top of the heaven, thereby in the process avoiding going to hell. So there is no difference between an Akbar and a Mujahideen who's fighting for Jaish-e-Muhammad. But while we are telling stories, let's go a step back to Humayun. Because on top of being a deviant, barbaric fool, Humayun was also a drug addict. It is said that he loved opium more than he loved his throne, which is perhaps reflected in the way that he died. On 24th of January 1556, in a pious response to the sacred call for evening prayer, Humayun, while hurriedly coming down from his library, stumbled out of the stairs, and 2 days later, in the picturesque words of Lane Poole, he tumbled out of life as he had tumbled through it. Because he was a coward he couldn't really find a place to call home, was pretty vagabondish, something that his father Babar could probably never have imagined for him. Of course, then there's Babar. Let's see what the history books say about Babar. Mr. Majumdar writes, he had little regard for the sanctity of human life. The massacre of Bajor, the cold-blooded murder of prisoners, and the inhumane punishments which are referred to in his memoirs only prove that he inherited the Mongol ferocity and Turkish savagery of his ancestors. This is Babar, after whom children in Pakistan are named. True to his age, he rejoiced in the glory of jihad and the majesty of the title Ghazi. To him, Sunnism was the pure faith, Shi'ism heresy, and a Shia was a rank heretic. With righteous satisfaction, he justifies and records the cruel massacre of Bajor because the victims were infidels. So even Babar was, again, a mujahid, constantly yearning for the title of a Ghazi and to get to the top level of the Islamic heaven. An incorrigible but repentant drunkard, he was keenly sensitive to the beauties of nature. Well, perhaps that's a redeeming quality at best. And the next line that Mr. Majumdar writes is a pretty good answer to those who claim that the Mughals became us, the Mughals, became Indians, and they loved our country and the culture so much that they came to stay. R.C. Majumdar writes, "The sweeping condemnation of Hindustan, its people as well as its culture, betrays as much his superficial acquaintance with as his supreme contempt for the land he conquered to stay in." This is Babar. So from Babar all the way down to Aurangzeb, it's one character after another. Can you call any of these guys civilized? Should any of these guys be glorified? So my point is this. Do not cancel the Mughals. Let's not erase them from our books. Let's teach their true history to all of our students through our coming generations. Because remember, knowing history can help us avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. We can learn from past conflicts, injustices, and atrocities, and using that, we can work to create a better future for ourselves and for our future generations. Because those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. Because forgetting history can lead to a risk of repeating past mistakes. Therefore, it is important to preserve and study history in order to learn from it and to ensure that the valuable lessons of the past are not lost or forgotten. And these are not the only stories of the Mughals. I had done quite a bit of research during my literary adventures, and I thought about making a few episodes on the Mughal history. Some very interesting information about Mr. Shahjehan, some histories that they do not teach you in school, historical facts that are not spoken about in mainstream media either. If you want me to do that, let me know. Leave me a comment or message me on Instagram. Some extremely spicy incidents from Shahjahan's personal life. And this is it for today's episode of the Indology podcast. Please subscribe to this channel and give me a like. And please share this in your WhatsApp groups, in your Telegram groups, and help me build up a community. Thank you so much for your time. Till the next time I see you, Jai Hind.